Dave Naylor from TSN, because there are a lot of upset people, heartbroken people, David, and kudos. Thanks for the time here today. What's the fallout been in your world in the last 24 hours since the CFL season cancellation?
Well, I mean, it's just uncertainty. I mean, I think everybody from, players to people on staffs to people at TSN who, predominantly work on game broadcasts are just kind of wondering what the future holds. And it's funny how when something's theoretical, and it can happen, it still doesn't hit until it does, right? And this wasn't a shock to anybody. I think it came as more of a surprise, maybe because of the sincere optimism that was bouncing around the league at this time a week ago than, had they called on August 1st when there was very, very little optimism. But it's very uncertain, and people don't know, what the situation is going to be a month from now. They don't know what the situation is going to be 4 months from now. And frankly, they don't know what it's going to be 10 months from now. When I hear the commissioner and other people talk about we're going to come back and we're going to be stronger. And the problem with that is this is out of their control. Randy Ambrosie can morph into the greatest commissioner in the history of sports. The CFL can adopt the greatest protocol for dealing with health and safety for players ever. They can scale back their economics and redo their business models. And if next spring you can't put 15 to 20,000 people in a stadium because the government says that's not safe, none of it's going to matter. And that's the frustrating thing. The league has always dealt with challenges, some very big ones, but it's never been in a situation where its biggest challenge is out of its control. And that is the case here.
And it is scary. It's a good term for it. Dave, does it matter who wanted to play and who didn't? Because you're seeing a lot of talk about it, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think, look, let me try and clarify this one because a little bit. I think everybody wanted to play. The question is under what circumstances people wanted to play. What was the acceptable level of risk? What was the acceptable level of financial risk? What was the acceptable level of financial loss? I don't know if it's shocking that around the table there was some disparity in the opinion on that, And look, in other leagues, they didn't go through this because it's like, we used to make this much money. Now we're going to make this much. But you're still making money by playing, right? So there's no debate about do we play. There were probably debates about how do we play. But in the CFL, because it was a matter of losing, hey, we think if we play, we can lose a little less money. But at the same time, you're also inheriting risk, right? Like when you play in a bubble, that I think the budget for their bubble total was $8 million, or at least that was the percentage of the part of the loan that they were directing towards that. I mean, the NBA's is $150 million, right? So you're not driving a Rolls Royce. That, and again, there may have been more to that bubble budget than the $8 million, but that was from the federal government part, what was going towards it. So I think there was, there's honestly, there's been risk here on every part, and I know that there were teams, I believe, in the room that would have played with no financial assistance. That they would have said, we'll do it anyway. But there weren't enough of them.
How about the player contracts? Because I was on TSN 1290 Winnipeg yesterday just before Wade Miller, and I didn't hang up. I wanted to listen to what Wade had to say. And he said, it hasn't been decided yet, Dave, what's going to happen with these player contracts. Tells me that a decision hasn't been made yet. Or what do you know about that?
I think the conversations are starting today. And look, there's no real advantage to the players becoming free agents unless you're one of the handful of guys who could go to the National Football League. And I mean handful, right? And look, most of the players who could go to the NFL did last offseason. And the rest of the league, why are players in the CFL in the first place? Because they've been to the NFL. They've already been there, right? It's not you're going to see a great exodus. And I'm trying to be disrespectful to players, but Nate Hawley can go. I've already been in contact with his agent today. He's got lots of teams that are interested. Some of them are hesitant because they don't know that he's free and clear of the CFL. Dakota Shepley probably could go. Richie Leone, maybe. Mike Moore. I mean, I run out of names after that of guys that I think didn't go last offseason and legitimately could get into an NFL camp. I know there's somebody who's tweeting about Josh Huff today. I mean, there may be other guys, and I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's going to be drips and drabs. So the question is, what do you do with the players that were under contract for 2020? I mean, I'll give you my idea. What I would allow players a window to opt out. Say, if you want to be a free agent, you let us know by, September 30th. you want to be a free agent. You can opt out of your deal. We violated the terms of your contract. You're allowed to be free if you're in the last year of your deal. If you don't want to be a free agent and you'd like to have your 2020 contract pushed to 2021, then if we don't hear from you, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to push it to 2021. That would make the most sense to me, because you wouldn't have mass chaos. It's not in anybody's interest, the league, the players, fans, anybody, to have every contract in the league void. Players don't want that. The league doesn't want that. The fans don't want that. That's my idea. I've shared it with a few people. I don't know whether they're going to listen, but we're going to get some clarity on that, very soon. But there's really nowhere for most of these guys to go. And I'm not sure more uncertainty in their lives is necessarily what they're looking for right now.
You make a good point. I don't think Cody Fajardo would want his contract torn up. I don't think he would at all.
No, he wants to be a Rough Rider, and he likes the number. He just negotiated it last summer. Yeah,
exactly. Mika always watching in Texas, and he's just written in the emoji of a notepad. Does that mean he's taking notes, Darren? Is that what Mika's saying?
Yeah.
Mika, is that what you're saying? He's taking notes of what you're saying, Dave. Now, furthermore, big picture, I've been on programs across the country talking about this CFL, and people are thinking this will spell the end of the league. And I'm like, guys, no, we've been talking about this for the last couple months. I get it. They're news people. They're not really paying attention to what's going on. You see, Dave, what's happened. CFL cancels the season. They've drawn a short line to the league folding. I'm not of that mindset anymore. And you've been tweeting to that effect for quite some time now, too. Can you restate it? Your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things. One is, it's interesting how, season not played, oh my God, league will fold. Well, if they had, and they'd handed out the Grey Cup on November 27th, they still would have been screwed on November 28th, right? The economic picture and the outlook for the league would not have been that much better if they played than if they'd not. There would have been games on TV, there would have been highlights, there would have been fan and sponsorship engagement. Playing is always better than not playing, but it's not like playing was going to get rid of all the CFL's worries and concerns for the future. They would have all been waiting for them at the day after the Grey Cup. And in fact, you can make the argument that with all the concerns they have, they're better to get a start on them now than they are to start them in December, which is not a month that anybody gets much done. So you'd probably really be talking about January. So that's one. There's no real correlation between if we played, the league's health would have been fine. If we didn't play, whoops, we're screwed. They're screwed either way. That's one. And in terms of the league folding or its future and all that, look, the question of whether they can play and operate this league in a pandemic while the government says you can't have large gatherings is a legitimate question, okay? If this pandemic lasts until 2023 or 2024, and you can't, and the Canadian government is going to say we cannot have gatherings of more than 2,000 people anywhere, well, I don't think the CFL can play. Unless they have a benefactor, right? Like you talked about the National Football League on your show a while ago. I think they have other things on their plate right now, but they would certainly have the financial ability to be the CFL's benefactor, whether it's the federal government, which has shown no interest in that, or low interest in that, or some other private entity that wants to come in and buy the league and inject cash in. Who knows? You got to get creative. Nothing's off the table. But until the government says you can put fans in stands in significant numbers, this league's business model is dust. So could I see that we might not have CFL for 2 or 3 years? Yeah, that's none of us know where this pandemic is going. Are we having a second wave? Are we having a spike in the winter, flu season? Who knows? But if that's where we are next spring, we're not playing football next year either, I don't think. But at some point, when life returns to normal, when the pandemic is past, and God, let's hope, a year from now we're saying it's in the rearview mirror, there's going to be stadiums in this country that are newly built worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There's going to be players from both the U.S. and Canada that want to play football. There's going to be fans across this country that want to watch the game. And there's going to be a television network that's going to want to make it the core of its programming between June and November. As long as all of those things exist, there will be a CFL. So I'm not making any promises to anybody about 2021 because I don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea what next spring or summer is going to look like. And I think as long as the pandemic is of the such that it's limiting public gatherings, we're going to be really challenged to play football. But someday we will. I just couldn't tell you when.
And one thing I don't think you mentioned is there will always be players. Tad Cornegay's watching in the tri-state area right now, Dave, and Tad says CFL can't afford to pay back a government loan for a failed season. That's just reality. The government knew that. The season not played this year equals cheaper, hungrier players the following year, or when we ever do get back to football. And that's the thing, David. I think we'll end there with your comments on this. The federal government does want to help out the CFL. I think they see the benefits of it, but it's going to be on their terms, not the CFL's terms, right? And on their timeline, not the CFL's timeline. So that's something we've learned in the last little while, too.
Yeah, I mean, the federal government, it's not like they don't have other things to be paying attention to, right? Like this was a competitive process just to get their attention. And I agree. Like I was told, 6 weeks ago by somebody, we don't think the federal government is that worried about having a 2020 season. But we do think the federal government doesn't want the Canadian football to go down on its watch. And when you look at their response, it lines up with that, right? We don't feel like we're going to get blamed or there's going to be any great fallout for us as a government if the CFL doesn't play a 6-game season in October and November. But should the CFL go down, that is not something the federal government wants. And I actually think if they are sincere, and there's some doubt about the government's sincerity on these things, because the CFL has basically come out and said, they led us on, and they should have just told us in May that they weren't going to help us, and we all would have been saved a lot of trouble. So, that's there may be the trust factor between the league and the government may not be extremely high right now. But if they're going to make good on that promise, that if the league is willing to be transparent and open its books and show the government the state of the business and what it needs in order to facilitate ongoing, then that's probably a preferable outcome than writing a $30 million check for an interest-free loan to play a 6-game season. So I'm not sure what we saw the other day is the worst outcome for this league.
Yeah, for sure. David, it's nice to be able to give you some time to expound upon your thoughts. So I'm glad you spent it with us. Thank you. Stay safe. And as you know, we're watching every day. Stay safe.
Thanks, Rod, and keep talking CFL.
We will. Thank you. Appreciate it. David Naylor joining us from Ontario, I think Newmarket, Ontario. And I appreciate the CFL current and past players chiming in, too, with their thoughts. It adds an interesting, different texture to what's going on, and certainly not anything anybody else can provide.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.